Sales of Good Act 1930. Chapter 1 Preliminary Section 1 to 3. The Sales of Good Act 1930 deal with the movable goods only. The sale of Good Act 1930 came into the force on 1st July 1930. The expression good under Section 2 Clause 7 of the Sales of Good Act include every kind of movable property other than the actionable claim and money. Goods within the meaning of Section 2 Clause 7 of Sales of Good Act is neither A nor B. Which one of the following are good within the meaning of Section 2 Clause 7 of the Sales of Good Act? Things either A or B. Things attached to the land which are agreed to be served before. Things forming part of the land agreed to be served before sale. Under Section 2 Clause 6 of the Sales of Good Act 1930, future goods means a good which are not yet in the existence. Future good has been defined in the Sales of Good Act under Clause 2 Clause 6. Delivery under the Sales of Good Act means voluntary transfer of the possession from one person to another. Property under Section 2 Clause 11 of the Sales of Good Act means the general property in the good. Price under the Sales of Good Act 1930 means a consideration in money. Chapter 2 Formation of Contract, Section 4 to 17. In a contract for sale a specific good, if at any time of the contract of good have, without the knowledge of the seller, perished, then a contract is void for both of the parties. Which one of the following is provided under Section 9 of the Sales of Good Act 1930? Assessment of the price. Section 9 of Sales of Good Act 1930 provided that assessment of the price in the agreement to the sale of good on the term that the price is to be fixed by valuation of the third party, but such third party failed to make the valuation, then the buyer and the seller cannot make the valuation and contract become void. A contract of sale of good can be conditional, absolute. In a sale of good act, condition is stipulation essential to the main purpose of the contract. If the contract for sale of good is for to the sale of two or more things under entire contract, the praising of some of them would be avoid the whole contract. Which one of the following section deal with the implied warranty in every contract of sale? Section 14 Clause B. Which one of the following section of the Sales of Good Act 1930 deal with the doctrine of caveat emptor? Section 16. The meaning of the term caveat emptor is let the buyer be aware. Where the price of the good under the contract of sale is fixed by the valuation of third party, who will fix the valuation? But the goods are supplied to the buyer under the Section 10 of Sales of Good Act 1930. The buyer is liable to pay the reasonable price of the goods. Stipulation is essential to main purpose of contract, the breach of which give the aggrieved party a right to repudiate the contract is known as condition. In a sale by simply an implied condition, the buyer shall have reasonable opportunity to compare the bulk with the sample. Goods are said to be derivable state where the buyer is bound to take their delivery under the contract. Chapter 3 Effect of the Contract, Section 18 to 30. Nemo dat quod non habet. No man can confer a better title than what which he himself has, is established principle of rule of transfer of property. The rule of the Latin maxim nemo dat quod non habet under sales of good contained in the section 27. Under Section 23 of Sales of Good Act, for passing the property of the good must be derivable state. Chapter 4 Performance of the contract, Section 31 to 33. As per the section 41, the buyer must have reasonable opportunity to examine the good for the purpose of asserting good or conformity with the contract. Chapter 5, Right of Unpaid Seller Against the Good, section 45 to 54. Whether the good is transist can be stopped by unpaid seller after agreeing to receive the price later on when the buyer became insolvent. Yes. The unpaid seller may exercise the right of stoppage in transit by taking the actual possession of good, by giving the notice of his claim to the carrier other than the bailee in whose possession the good are. Under section 51 of Sales of Good Act, goods are in transit long as they are in possession of the carrier co-carrier. Which one of the following right of unpaid seller can be exercised only when the buyer has become insolvent and not otherwise? Right to stoppage in transit. The right of unpaid seller have been listed in section 46. The unpaid seller can exercise the right of stoppage of the good and transit where the buyer became insolvent. Chapter 6, Suit for the breach of the contract, section 55 to 61. Section 57 of the Sales of Good Act deals with suit for the damage for non-derivable. Chapter 7, Miscellaneous, section 62 to 66. In the sale of goods by auction, as soon as the hammer fall, the good became the property of buyer, even if there is a condition that goods shall not be removed before the payment. Under section 3 of 63 of Sales of Good Act, reasonable time means question of fact. When goods are capable of many purpose and the buyer does not mention his purpose, the condition as to fitness cannot be implied. A contract of sale and contract of sale by sample, when there is expresses implied term of the contract to its effect, where the condition is to be satisfied. To avail the exception under section 16 clause 1 of Sales of Good Act 1930, the buyer should make known the seller of particular purpose for which the good is required. The buyer should relay the seller skill or judgment. The goods must be in the description which the seller supply in the course of his business. Bardley versus Marshall is a leading case relating to fitness for buyer. Condition for warranty in a contract may be express or implied. A Sale of Good Act under the Sale of Good Act 1930 create a jus in rem. Under the Sale of Good Act 1930, delivery can be symbolic only, actual only, constructive only, all of the above. The Sale of Good Act is based on English Sales of Good Act 1893.